The sky above central Syndicate City split at 3:17 in the afternoon, not with thunder, not with light. The fracture ran silent, a geometric lattice spreading across the upper atmosphere like frost on glass. Red and violet energies bled through the cracks, colors that shouldn't exist in nature, colors that made the eye ache to process them. The lattice pulsed once, twice, and the light dimmed beneath it, as if something on the other side was drinking the photons. In the commercial district, a crowd didn't scatter. They calculated. Looters grabbed what they could before the lockdown. Store owners shot first, asked questions never. Police cordons formed not to protect civilians, but to secure revenue zones. The city had learned long ago that morality was expensive and survival was transactional. A woman in a business suit ran past an overturned cart. Not because she feared for her life, but because the stock market would crash in 11 minutes and she needed to liquidate before the automated systems locked her out. A teenager filmed the sky with dead eyes, already composing the caption that would maximize engagement. An old man sat on a bench and watched, having seen 3 regime changes and 4 apocalyptic scares, knowing that whatever came next would still require him to pay his protection fees. The lattice consumed a streetlight. The metal and circuitry didn't explode. They hollowed out, collapsing inward, until only a wireframe silhouette remained for half a heartbeat before crumbling to fine gray powder. The crowd noticed. Someone screamed. Not in horror, in recognition of lost infrastructure, lost taxable assets. "It's eating the light," a voice said from somewhere in the chaos. "Stand still," a security officer barked, raising his weapon. "Anyone runs, I fire." Nobody ran. They repositioned, calculated new angles. The city's survival instinct wasn't about heroism. It was about reading the power shift before the next person did. High above the disorder inside the reinforced tower that served as the Syndicate's nerve center, Owlman stood before a wall of screens. His cape hung motionless in the climate-controlled air. Behind the cowl, his expression never changed as the data scrolled across his retinas. Atmospheric distortion, energy signature unknown, spatial coordinates locked to a point 17 miles above sea level. "Analysis," he said. A technician's hands trembled over the console. "It's not consuming energy, sir. It's collecting it. Drawing from parallel dimensional frequencies." The signature matches the theoretical models from the Quartian core we installed last month. Owlman's fingers drummed once against his belt. The multiverse tax. Behind him, Ultraman stood with arms crossed, his shadow falling across 3 operators who'd learned to work faster under his gaze. About time something interesting showed up. His voice carried the casual certainty of someone who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't punch through. "This world's been boring lately." Superwoman leaned against the war table, one hand resting near a knife she didn't need to draw to make her point. "Interesting only matters if we control it. Who's holding the switch?" Johnny Quick vibrated in place molecules, humming with barely contained speed. "More importantly, what's the payout? I didn't sign up for science projects. I signed up for profit." Owlman turned from the screens. "The payout is leverage over every Earth in the local cluster. The Quartian lattice doesn't just draw power. It creates a siphon effect. Neighboring realities bleed energy into our collection matrix. Free resources, infinite resources." "Infinite is a strong word," Superwoman said. "What's the failure rate?" 17% chance of catastrophic dimensional collapse within the first 48 hours. Dropping to 4% after stabilization. "And if it collapses?" Owlman pulled up a simulation. A red sphere expanded across the holographic display, consuming the city, the continent, the planet. Localized erasure. Everything within a 3,000-mile radius would cease to maintain structural cohesion. Ultraman laughed a sound like grinding metal plates. "Then we don't let it collapse. Simple." Near the back of the room, Power Ring stood with both hands gripping the railing hard enough to leave impressions in the steel. The emerald glow from his ring pulsed arrhythmically. His breathing came shallow and quick. The voice in his head never stopped. It hadn't stopped in months. "Touch it," Voltum whispered. "Touch the core. Feel what's underneath." "Shut up," Power Ring muttered. "You feel it too, don't you?" The hum, the frequency. It's not pulling energy, it's calling. Calling for something that can answer, something clean, something that erases without residue. Power Ring's hand moved toward the central console before he caught himself. The others hadn't noticed. They never noticed when Voltum spoke. That was the problem. The ring's voice existed in a frequency only he could hear, a pressure behind his eyes that built and built until he had to act or go insane. "It's ready for field testing," Owlman announced. "We've identified a low-value zone for the first extraction." On the main screen, a residential sector appeared. 12,000 people. Lower economic bracket, minimal strategic importance. The kind of neighborhood where disappearances got filed under acceptable losses in the quarterly reports. "Do it," Ultraman said. Owlman's fingers moved across the haptic interface. Somewhere in the infrastructure, relays clicked. Power surged. The lattice above the city pulsed brighter, and in the residential zone, reality began to thin. A building went first. Not the people inside, just the structure. The bricks and mortar lost cohesion at the molecular level, blurring like a photograph left in the rain. The residents felt it before they saw it. A sensation of wrongness, of standing too close to an edge they couldn't see. Some ran. Most stood frozen, waiting for orders from authority that never came. The building became a silhouette. Still recognizable, but hollow, a outline sketched in smoke. Then it wasn't even that. Just empty space, where tons of concrete and steel had stood seconds before, and a wind that rushed in to fill the vacuum with a sound like a long exhalation. Owlman watched the readings. Energy transfer at 92% efficiency. Minimal dimensional bleed. The system is stable. "What about the people?" Superwoman asked, though her tone suggested the question was academic. "Relocated to processing centers. Standard procedure." That was a lie. The people were still there, staring at the empty space, trying to understand why their homes had been converted to raw energy and fed into a machine they'd never been told existed. Some would file complaints. Those complaints would disappear into the same void as the buildings. Others would adapt, would learn that in this city, you didn't own property. You rented existence from people who could revoke the lease without notice. The screen showed the crowd dispersing. Not fleeing. Dispersing. Returning to their routines, because what else could they do? Fight the sky. The city had spent decades teaching its population that resistance was just a slower form of suicide. "Scale it up," Ultraman said. 30% capacity. "I want to see what this thing can really do." Owlman hesitated, not from concern, from calculation. "The monitoring systems will notice." "Let them notice. We own the monitoring systems." "Not all of them. The dimensional observers, the..." Ultraman's hand came down on the table hard enough to crack the surface. "I said scale it up." Owlman entered the commands. Professional, efficient. He'd made his objection. It had been noted and overruled. The decision now belonged to someone else, which meant the consequences did too. That was how power worked here. Spread the accountability so thin that when things collapsed, no one person could be held responsible. The lattice expanded. The red-violet glow intensified. Across 6 city blocks, streetlights flickered and died. Not from power failure, from consumption. The energy that kept them running was being siphoned away, pulled through dimensional membranes into the Quardian core buried 300 feet beneath the Syndicate tower. And deep in that core, wrapped in antimatter shielding and quantum isolation fields, something stirred. Power Ring felt it immediately. His ring flared so bright it cast his shadow across the entire operations room. "What is it?" Superwoman's hand moved to her weapon. I don't... Power Ring pressed his free hand against his temple. The pressure was immense now, a building scream that wanted out. It's not just energy. There's something else. The lattice is pulling at something that isn't... It's not a resource. It's a jurisdiction. Alman turned. Explain. The ring. It's picking up a resonance. Something on the other side of the lattice. Not power. Authority. Authority over what? Power Ring's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Over whether things continue existing. The room went quiet except for the hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the city adapting to its new reality. On the screens, the energy readings climbed. 94%. 97. The lattice had locked onto some frequency in the dimensional static that resonated with the Quartian technology's fundamental design. In the core chamber, buried where no cameras watched the instruments, registered a response. Something on the other side of the dimensional membrane had noticed, had woken, had found the pull irritating enough to investigate. The reading spiked. Not a surge, a presence. Like the moment before lightning strikes when the air pressure changes and every animal instinct screams to find cover. Alman's screens filled with data he'd never seen before. Energy patterns that violated thermodynamics, spatial distortions that suggested something very large was moving through a space far too small to contain it. The mathematics didn't work, the physics were wrong, but the readings were undeniable. We've established contact, he said. And for the first time in years, there was something in his voice that might have been excitement. With what I don't yet know. But whatever it is, it's responding to the lattice. Ultraman grinned. Then let's give it a reason to respond harder. The command went out. The lattice drew deeper. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, in a dimension that existed at an angle to every axis, Earth 3 understood something that had been sleeping for 39 years, opened its eyes, and felt the annoying tug of someone pulling on threads they didn't understand. The presence shifted, not moving closer, simply deciding to notice. In the operations room, every screen went dark for exactly 2 seconds. When they came back online, the energy readings had changed. The lattice was still pulling. But now something was pulling back. Owlman's hands moved across his console, trying to understand what he was seeing. The numbers made no sense. The flow had reversed. The system was designed to extract energy from other dimensions. Now it was receiving something. Not energy, not matter. Something that existed in a category his instruments couldn't classify. Cut it, Superwoman said. Whatever that is, cut the connection. No. Ultraman stepped forward. This is exactly what we wanted. Something powerful enough to be worth the risk. We don't know what it is. That's what makes it valuable. Power Ring's ring was screaming now, a high-pitched whine only he could hear. Voltum's voice rode the frequency like a knife. It's coming. It's coming, and it's perfect. Everything we've been waiting for. The authority to unmake. The jurisdiction over null. Let it through. Let it through, and we can... Shut up. Power Ring slammed his ringed hand against the console. The emerald construct that formed was involuntary, a spike of crystallized fear that punched through the haptic interface and shattered 3 screens. The others stared. Equipment malfunction, Power Ring managed. The interference from the lattice is... The lights went out, not flickered. Went out. Every light in the tower, every screen, every holographic display, the backup generators kicked in after 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, something changed. The air pressure, the ambient temperature, the fundamental certainty that the room was a fixed point in space. When the lights returned, there was a figure standing in the center of the operations room. Not tall, not imposing in the way Ultraman was imposing, just present. undeniably, impossibly present. In a space that had been empty 3 seconds ago past every security system and sealed door. Standing there like he'd always been there, and they were the ones who'd appeared around him. Purple skin, feline features, large golden eyes that held no curiosity, no anger, no emotion, except a vague irritation at having been disturbed. He wore what looked like ancient ceremonial clothing, Egyptian in aesthetic, but wrong in the details, as if someone had remembered the style, but not the meaning. Beerus stood in the Syndicate's command center and looked around with the expression of someone who'd woken up to find his house infested with something noisy and disposable. Nobody moved. Even Ultraman, whose first instinct was always violence, held still. Some survival instinct deeper than ego recognized that movement right now would be interpreted as a decision, and decisions had consequences. The silence stretched. Beerus's gaze moved across each of them in turn. Not assessing, cataloging. The way someone might glance at furniture before deciding whether to bother moving it or just destroy it to make space. His eyes settled on Alman. "You," Beerus said. His voice was flat bored. "You're the one who pulled me here." Alman's mind raced through scenarios. Threat assessment, negotiation angles, power dynamics. "We activated a dimensional siphon. If that's what brought you, then yes, we're responsible. Turn it off. The system is experimental. Shutting it down improperly could—" "I don't care about your system." Beerus's gaze hadn't moved. "I care that something woke me up. Turn it off, or I will." Ultraman stepped forward. "You don't give orders here. This is Earth 3. I give the orders." Beerus looked at him the way someone might look at a fly that had landed on their meal. "Do you have food?" The question hung in the air, absurd and dangerous. "What? Food? You pulled me from sleep. The least you can do is provide something worth eating." Beerus's tone suggested this was perfectly reasonable. "If you don't have food, then you're wasting my time, and I don't tolerate waste." Superwoman moved to Ultraman's side, her posture careful. "We can provide whatever you need. But first, we should establish terms. You're clearly powerful. We have resources. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement that benefits both parties." "I don't make arrangements with furniture." The insult landed like a physical blow. Superwoman's hand twitched toward her weapon. Owlman raised one finger, a tiny gesture. She stopped. "You're treating this as a negotiation," Owlman said. "That suggests you believe we have something to negotiate with. What do you want?" Beerus yawned. The gesture was casual, almost bored, but in that moment the air pressure in the room changed. Just slightly. Just enough that every person present felt their lungs work harder to draw breath. "I want whoever designed that pulling sensation to understand that waking me is a privilege reserved for things that interest me. You don't interest me. You annoy me. There's a difference." Johnny Quick's speed formula ran through his head, unbidden, a nervous habit. Every calculation said, run. Every instinct said that staying in this room was a death sentence. But where could he run that would be fast enough? Power Ring felt Voltum go quiet. For the first time in months, the voice stopped. The ring's glow dimmed to almost nothing. And in that sudden silence in his head, Power Ring understood something that made his blood run cold. The ring was afraid. Voltum. The ancient entity that had terrorized him for months, that had consumed Green Lanterns and twisted timelines, was afraid of whatever stood in the center of the room, wearing the shape of something vaguely cat-like and deeply wrong. "Bring food, my Sama," Beerus said. "Now. And make it something I haven't tasted before. If you bore me with your cooking, I'll become annoyed. If I become annoyed, I stop bothering to notice what's in my way when I leave." He sat down. Not in a chair. Just sat cross-legged in the middle of their war room, as if the floor belonged to him more than the tower belonged to them. Owlman made a decision. Get the chefs, everything we have. Move. The technicians scattered. Superwoman didn't move her eyes, locked on Beerus. Ultraman's fists clenched and unclenched. Johnny Quick vibrated in place, waiting for someone to make the first mistake. And in the core, far below, the lattice continued to pulse, drawing energy from neighboring dimensions, filling reservoirs that would never be full enough to contain what they'd accidentally summoned. Beerus closed his eyes. "Wake me when the food arrives," he said. "And tell your machine to stop pulling. The sound is irritating." Owlman moved to the console. His hands hesitated over the controls. Shutting down the lattice meant admitting they'd lost control. Keeping it running meant testing whether their uninvited guests' patience extended beyond the next few minutes. He made the calculation. Shut it down. The lattice wound down with a descending whine that set teeth on edge. The red-violet glow faded from the sky. Across the city, people looked up and wondered if the crisis was over or just paused. In the operations room, Beerus sat motionless, waiting, not sleeping, just waiting with the infinite patience of something that understood time as a resource it could never exhaust. The crime syndicate stood in their own headquarters and realized they were no longer in control. The realization settled like frost. Owlman pulled up a communication window and began typing orders. Kitchen staff, security protocols, contingency plans. His mind worked through scenarios, but every scenario ended the same way. They'd pulled something into their world that didn't operate by their rules, and now they had to figure out how to survive it, or how to use it, because in the end, that was what Earth 3 did. It took power and made it into leverage. It took threats and turned them into assets. And if this purple-skinned entity thought he could sit in their command center and demand tribute, he was about to learn that the crime syndicate had been eating gods for breakfast long before he arrived. Ultraman's smile returned, slower, colder. "Get him his food," he said quietly. "And then we'll see exactly what we've caught." The silence lasted 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, every monitoring system in the Syndicate Tower recalibrated 3 times, trying to explain how something had appeared in a sealed room. Atmospheric sensors detected a presence but couldn't classify it. Thermal imaging showed heat that fluctuated outside biological norms. The security protocols designed to lock down the facility in case of dimensional breach all triggered simultaneously, then shut off, confused by the fact that the breach had already resolved and the intruder was simply sitting there, waiting. Beerus didn't move. His eyes were closed. His breathing was so subtle that, for a moment, Owlman wondered if the entity was actually asleep, if they'd somehow pulled something mid-hibernation that considered their entire reality an inconvenient interruption to a nap. The thought was absurd. It was also the only explanation that fit the data. Superwoman broke the silence first. Not with words, with positioning. She shifted her weight, a subtle movement that put her at a better angle for attack or retreat. Her hand didn't move toward any weapon, but the readiness was there, coiled and waiting. Beerus's eyes opened. Not quickly, just the slow blink of someone who'd noticed a fly buzzing and decided whether it was worth the energy to swat it. His gaze settled on Superwoman for exactly 2 seconds, then moved past her like she'd failed some test of relevance. "Loud," he said. The word hung in the air. No one responded because no one understood what he meant. The room was quiet. The systems hummed, but softly. There was no construction, no alarms, nothing that registered as noise. Owlman's mind worked through possibilities. Dimensional sensitivity, different sensory range, or simply a complaint so alien to their context that translation was failing at a conceptual level. "The lattice," Owlman said. "If the dimensional siphon is still causing interference, we can—" "Not the machine." Beerus's tone carried the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone very slow. "You, all of you, thinking too loud." Johnny Quick's molecules stopped vibrating. The sudden stillness was more unsettling than the constant motion had been. Power Ring felt Volthum stir. Not speaking, just present in a way he hadn't been since the entity arrived. The ring pulsed once, weak and uncertain. Interesting, Ultraman said. He hadn't moved from his position, but his posture had shifted. Evaluating. You can sense thought. I can sense pressure. You're all pressing, trying to figure out how to use me. Beerus tilted his head slightly. Boring. Superwoman stepped forward. Not aggressive, diplomatic. The shift from warrior to negotiator was seamless, practiced. If we've offended you by bringing you here, that wasn't our intention. The dimensional lattice was experimental technology. We didn't know what it would connect to. You knew it would connect to something. Beerus's eyes tracked her movement with the disinterest of someone watching clouds drift. That's why you built it. To pull, to take, to claim things that didn't belong to you. We're explorers, Superwoman said smoothly. Every civilization reaches outward. Every culture seeks new resources, new knowledge. You can't fault ambition. I don't fault anything. I just decide what stays and what doesn't. The statement landed flat. No threat in the delivery, no emphasis. Just a fact stated the way someone might mention the weather. Owlman's fingers moved behind his back, subtle gestures to the security team watching on monitors. Stand down. Observe. No action. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved with force, and anyone who tried would just provide data about how thoroughly they could be erased. We have a proposal, Owlman said. Beerus yawned. The gesture should have been harmless, an expression of boredom. But in that moment, the air pressure dropped. Just for a heartbeat. Just enough that everyone in the room felt their ears pop and their lungs work harder to compensate. When it passed, no one was entirely certain it had happened, but the instinctive understanding remained. This thing could alter physics by being tired. I don't want proposals, Beerus said. I want food and quiet. In that order. Ultraman's patience, already thin, cracked at the edges. You're in our house. You don't get to make demands. Your house. Beerus looked at him fully for the first time. This building, this city, this planet, all of it, wrong. You occupy, you control, you claim, but ownership. Beerus's voice dropped half an octave. Ownership requires permission. Who gave you permission? Quote. The question had no good answer. Ultraman's jaw tightened. We took it. Same as anyone with enough strength takes what they want. Then you understand the principle. Beerus stood. The motion was fluid, unhurried, and somehow final. I'm stronger. I'm taking quiet. And food. Johnny Quick ran probability calculations faster than thought. Every scenario ended with him being too slow. The realization made his hands shake. We can provide food, Owlman said. His tone had shifted. Still controlled, but the parameters had changed. They weren't negotiating terms. They were managing consequences. Our chefs have access to cuisines from across the planet. If you tell us what you prefer, we can surprise me. Beerus sat back down. If it's good, I'll stay calm. If it's boring, I'll leave. What I break on the way out isn't my concern. Superwoman exchanged a glance with Owlman. A full conversation in a look. They were being extorted with food. The absurdity would have been laughable if the alternative wasn't having their city erased because someone served a mediocre appetizer. I'll coordinate with the kitchens, she said. Make it fast, Beerus said. I'm annoyed. Being annoyed makes me less patient. Being less patient makes me messy. Superwoman left, not fleeing, strategic repositioning. But she left and everyone noticed. The room felt smaller without her presence to diffuse the tension. Ultraman stood with fists clenched, every muscle coiled for a fight he couldn't start. Owlman remained at his console, fingers ready on controls he knew wouldn't matter. Johnny Quick vibrated again, microscopic movements that were probably involuntary at this point. And Power Ring stood very still because Voltoom was whispering again. It's not alive, the voice said. Quiet, almost wondering. Not like us, not like anything. It's a function, a process. It has form, but the form is just courtesy. Underneath, it's just the end of things, given shape and breath, and terrible, terrible patience. Power Ring's hand trembled. What do we do? Nothing, Voltum said. We do nothing. We wait. We survive. And if it asks for something, we give it. Because the alternative is being noticed. It already noticed us? No. Voltum's voice carried something that might have been fear or might have been awe. It noticed the machine. We're just what's near the machine. Furniture, decoration. If we're very fortunate, it will eat and leave and forget we existed. Power Ring had never heard Voltum speak with anything resembling humility. The entity had consumed worlds, had broken timelines, had stood against guardians and laughed. And now it was suggesting they played dead and hoped to be ignored. Owlman's voice cut through the silence. You mentioned you were sleeping. How long? Beerus didn't open his eyes. Does it matter? Context helps negotiation. This isn't negotiation. This is you learning new rules. But after a moment, Beerus continued. 39 years. I was asleep for 39 years, before your machine made noise. Ultraman barked a short laugh. You sleep for decades. What are you, a god? The question hung in the air. Beerus's eyes opened halfway. No, he said. Gods serve, I destroy. The distinction seemed important to him. No one in the room understood why, which meant they were missing critical information, which meant Owlman's threat assessment was incomplete. He adjusted his calculations. Whatever this entity was, it operated outside the frameworks they understood. Not more powerful, though, that was clearly true, but categorically different. A piece from a game that didn't share their board. The food is being prepared, Owlman said. While we wait, perhaps you can explain what would satisfy you enough to return to wherever you came from. Turn off your machine, Beerus said. Permanently. The lattice is our primary energy source for the next phase of expansion. Shutting it down would... I don't care about your expansion. Beerus's tone hadn't changed. Still flat, still bored. Your machine pulls. Pulling disturbs things. Disturbing things wakes them up. I don't like being woken up. So this is revenge. Ultraman stepped forward. Someone bothers you, and you show up to threaten them. No, if this was revenge, you'd be gone. This is me giving you a chance to stop annoying me. And if we don't stop... Beerus looked at Ultraman the way someone might look at a stain on their shirt. Then I stop you. Permanently. The threat was almost gentle in its delivery. No heat, no anger. Just the plain statement of cause and effect. Owlman's mind raced through scenarios. The lattice represented months of work, millions in resources, connections to power grids across 6 continents. Shutting it down meant losing their leverage over the regional governments, meant watching their competitors fill the vacuum, meant admitting weakness. But keeping it running meant this entity remained in their headquarters making demands. We need time to properly shut down the system, Owlman said. Immediate cessation could cause dimensional feedback that affects... I said turn it off. I didn't say safely. Beerus closed his eyes again. If your machine breaks things when it stops, that's not my problem. That's yours for building it wrong. Johnny Quick's speed formula ran through his head on repeat. Not because he was planning to run, because his brain was trying to process impossible odds, and the only output it could produce was the mathematical proof that nothing he did would matter. The door opened. Superwoman returned with 3 staff members pushing carts. The smell hit the room immediately. Seared meat, exotic spices, fruits that cost more per pound than most people earned in a month. The kitchen staff had clearly received the message, impress or face consequences. Beerus opened his eyes and looked at the food. The staff arranged dishes in silence. No presentation speech, no explanation of ingredients. They knew better. This wasn't a dining experience. This was tribute. Beerus stood and walked to the nearest cart. He picked up something that might have been a dumpling, examined it for a moment, then ate it. Everyone watched. His expression didn't change. He reached for another dish, tasted it. Still nothing. A third, fourth, fifth. The silence stretched. The staff stood frozen, waiting for judgment. Superwoman's hand rested near her weapon, not because she thought it would help, but because doing nothing felt worse. Beerus finished sampling the offerings. He looked at the head chef, a man who'd won awards across 3 continents and who was currently sweating through his uniform. "Adequate," Beerus said. The chef exhaled. It might have been relief. It might have been the release of tension before collapse. "Not interesting," Beerus continued. "Not exciting, but adequate. You cook with fear. Fear makes everything taste the same." He walked back to his spot and sat down. Not eating more. Just sitting. "Your machine," he said. "Turn it off, now." Alman looked at Ultraman. The unspoken question passed between them. Ultraman's jaw worked. His pride wanted to fight. His survival instinct said, "Wait." "Do it," Ultraman said finally. Owlman moved to the console. His fingers hesitated over the controls. Every instinct said this was surrender. But surrender to what they weren't at war. This wasn't conquest. This was something outside those categories entirely. He initiated the shutdown sequence. Not safe, not gradual, full stop. The lattice above the city died. The red-violet glow faded. The dimensional pull ceased. Across 6 city blocks, people looked up and wondered if the crisis had ended or just paused. In the operations room, instruments registered the change. Power reserves dropped. Energy flow reversed. The Quardian core began cycling down its systems, returning to standby mode. Beerus nodded once. Better. The tension in the room didn't decrease. It shifted. From immediate crisis to uncertain aftermath. They'd complied with the demand. "Now what?" "You should leave," Ultraman said. "You got what you wanted." "I wanted sleep," Beerus corrected. "What I got was a meal and silence, not the same thing." "Then go back to sleep somewhere else." Beerus looked around the room, at the monitors, the weapons, the people trying very hard to look like they weren't planning violence. His gaze settled on Owlman. "You're the one who thinks," he said. "Tell me, what happens when I leave?" Owlman understood the trap immediately. "We reactivate the lattice." "Yes, and the lattice pulls, and I wake up again, and next time I won't ask for food." "So you're staying..." Superwoman had returned to her diplomatic stance. As what, a guest, a warden? As a reminder. Beerus stood. "Your machine was loud. You made it loud on purpose. You wanted something to answer. Something did. Now you have to live with that." He walked toward the exit, not asking permission, just walking. The guards near the door moved aside without being told. "Where are you going?" Owlman asked. "Somewhere quiet," Beerus said. "This building is too noisy. Too many people thinking too loud. I'll find a place that isn't annoying." "You can't just wander around the city," Ultraman said. Beerus stopped, turned, looked at Ultraman with an expression that might have been curiosity, or might have been the last moment of patience before something snapped. "Can't..." The word was very quiet. Ultraman held his ground. "This is our city, our territory. We have rules." "Your rules," Beerus said. "Your territory, your problem." He turned back to the exit. "If your rules try to stop me, I'll erase them, along with whoever's enforcing them." The door opened. Beerus walked through. The door closed. For 5 seconds, no one moved. Then Owlman's fingers flew across his console. Satellite feeds, street cameras, thermal tracking. Every monitoring system focused on the entity that had just left their headquarters and was now loose in the most dangerous city on the planet. The feeds showed nothing. Beerus had simply vanished. Not running, not flying, not teleporting in any way the sensors could detect. Just gone, as if the concept of being tracked had never applied to him in the first place. Analysis, Ultraman demanded. Unknown, Owlman said. He's not on any grid, not in any database. The dimensional signature is... He stopped, adjusted his instruments. It's not reading as dimensional, it's reading as local. As if he's native to this reality, but the reality is bending to accommodate him. That's impossible. Yes, it is. Power Ring's ring pulsed. Voltoom's voice was barely a whisper now. The lattice pulled something that doesn't belong to any reality. It belongs to the concept underneath. The foundation. The law that says everything ends. What do we do? Johnny Quick asked. His voice cracked slightly. Owlman pulled up building schematics, security protocols, contingency plans that had been designed for alien invasions, dimensional incursions, reality warpers. None of them accounted for something like this. We adapt, he said. Whatever that entity is, it has needs. Appetites, preferences. Needs can be managed. Appetites can be satisfied. Preferences can be exploited. You want to manipulate it, Superwoman said. I want to survive it. Manipulation is just one tool. Ultraman slammed his fist into the wall. The reinforced alloy crumpled. I don't run from threats. I end them. This isn't a threat, Owlman said quietly. Threats want something from you. This thing wants us to stop existing loudly. There's a difference. Then what is it? Owlman looked at the empty space where Beerus had been sitting. The floor wasn't marked. The air wasn't disturbed. There was no evidence anyone had been there, except memory and the lingering sense that the room had been occupied by something that could have erased it at any moment and simply chose not to. It's a test, Owlman said. The universe is testing whether we're smart enough to stop pulling on things we don't understand. And if we're not, Johnny Quick asked. Owlman didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all understood. The test had one outcome for failure: erasure. Outside in the city that never stopped calculating angles and counting profits, Beerus walked down a street and people moved aside without knowing why. Their instincts recognized something their minds couldn't process. A presence that existed in the space between threat and natural disaster. He found a park, not large, just a patch of engineered green in a city of concrete and steel. He sat beneath a tree that had been planted for tax benefits and closed his eyes. The city hummed around him. Vehicles, machines, people shouting and fighting and dying over scraps of power. All of it meaningless noise, but quieter than before. He'd give them time, see if they learned, see if they were smart enough to leave him alone. And if they weren't, he'd teach them the lesson every civilization eventually learned. That existence was a privilege, not a right. And privileges could be revoked. The orders went out at 4 a.m. Not requests. Orders. The kind that came with armed escorts and locked doors, and the understanding that refusal meant disappearing into processing centers where questions stopped being asked. Chefs were pulled from their homes. Supply lines were rerouted. Entire markets were stripped before dawn, their owners compensated with transfers that would clear in 3 business days if they didn't file complaints. No one filed complaints. Filing meant attention. Attention meant audits. Audits meant finding out how many rules you'd broken just by surviving in a city where breaking rules was the only way to eat. The central kitchen complex had been running for 16 hours straight. 3 shifts. No breaks. Security stood at every door, because when you consolidated this much value in one location, people got ideas. The head chef, a man named Torrance, who'd worked for dictators on 4 continents, moved between stations with the efficiency of someone who understood that excellence wasn't optional. Where did the quail come from? He asked. Import seizure, his assistant said. Customs confiscated it from a diplomatic shipment. We requisitioned it. Torrance didn't ask what happened to the diplomats. He didn't care. The bird was fresh. The preparation would be flawless. That was all that mattered. A security officer stood near the main prep station, weapon visible. Not pointed, just present. The message was clear. Cook well. Cook fast. Cook like your life depends on it, because it does. Torrance had cooked for warlords who'd executed staff for under-seasoning. He'd prepared meals for corporate executives who measured status by how many people they could afford to waste. Earth-3 was just more honest about it. The violence wasn't hidden behind HR departments and severance packages. It was right there in the room, watching you dice vegetables with a gun. He worked. His staff worked. They produced dishes that would have won awards in any other city, created from ingredients that had been stolen, extorted, or seized at gunpoint in the last 12 hours. No one thanked the farmers who'd been bankrupted to supply the produce. No one compensated the fishermen whose catch had been commandeered. Earth-3 didn't deal in gratitude. It dealt in extraction. The food arrived in the Syndicate Tower in armored transports. 3 vehicles, 16 armed guards, a manifest that listed ingredients by monetary value and strategic importance. The logistics alone represented 6 months of planning compressed into half a day through the application of overwhelming force. Alman reviewed the manifest from his console. Acceptable. Not impressive, but acceptable. The goal wasn't to please. It was to avoid giving offense severe enough to trigger erasure. Status of the entity, he said. A technician pulled up satellite feeds. Still in the park. Hasn't moved in 7 hours. Readings. Thermal signature fluctuates. Sometimes present, sometimes not. It's like he's phasing in and out of measurable reality, or the reality around him is adjusting, Alman said quietly. Spatial displacement without movement. He's not going somewhere else. Somewhere else is coming to him. The technician nodded like he understood. He didn't. No one did. That was the problem. Every measurement they took of this entity returned data that violated fundamental principles. Matter that existed and didn't. Energy that flowed backward. Space that bent without force. Bring him the food, Alman said. And make sure the delivery team understands. No questions, no commentary. Deliver and withdraw. The team that approached the park did so with the caution of people defusing a bomb. 4 staff members. 2 guards at distance. Carts of food that represented more wealth than most people saw in a lifetime, assembled through methods that would require systematic documentation destruction to avoid prosecution in any functional legal system. Not that Earth-3 had a functional legal system. It had power. Laws were just the language power used to justify itself. Beerus sat beneath a tree that had been planted 15 years ago as part of a green initiative that lasted 6 months before the funding was redirected to weapons development. His eyes were closed. He might have been sleeping. He might have been aware of every atom in a 3-mile radius. There was no way to tell. The lead server cleared her throat. "Sir, we've brought..." Beerus's eyes opened. She stopped talking. Survival instinct overrode training. When something looked at you like that, like you were a noise, it was deciding whether to silence you, stopped making noise. "Leave it," Beerus said. They left it. They left it and walked backward for the first 10 steps before turning and moving faster. Not running. Running suggested panic, but definitely moving with purpose. Beerus looked at the food. 17 dishes. Meats from 6 continents. Spices that required trade routes and tariffs and occasionally small wars. Fruits grown in controlled environments by people who'd never taste them. All of it arranged with professional precision on carts that cost more than the average monthly wage. He stood, walked to the nearest cart, picked up something wrapped in leaves that had been transported 3,000 miles in refrigerated containers. The texture was wrong, not the cooking, the ingredient itself. It had been harvested too early, rushed through processing, frozen and thawed twice. The desperation was cooked into it. He set it down. Tried another dish. Meat seared to perfection, but seasoned with fear. He could taste it. The way the chef's hands had shaken. The way the prep staff had worked, knowing that failure meant consequences that extended beyond determination. A third dish, a fourth, fifth, all of it adequate. All of it expensive. All of it extracted through mechanisms that made the food itself an act of violence. Beerus walked back to his tree and sat down. In the operations room, Owlman watched through surveillance feeds that barely held focus on the entity. Assessment. He's not eating, a technician said. I can see that. Why? Unknown. Thermal readings suggest increased agitation, or possibly digestive displeasure. The readings aren't. He's not pleased, Superwoman said. She stood near the window looking out over the city. We gave him exactly what he asked for, and he's not pleased. Then we adjust the menu, Ultraman said. Bring different food, better food. It's not about the food, Owlman said quietly. Then what? Owlman didn't answer. He was watching Beerus through the feed, watching the way the entity sat motionless beneath a tree in a park, surrounded by a city built on exploitation, and something about the stillness suggested a decision being made. In the park, Beerus opened his eyes. Fear, he said to no one in particular. Every dish tastes like fear. He stood, looked in the direction of the Syndicate tower miles away, but somehow clearly visible to whatever senses he possessed. His expression didn't change. No anger, no disappointment, just a mild irritation that had crossed a threshold from ignorable to actionable. He raised one hand. Not dramatically, just lifted it fingers loose, the gesture almost lazy, and reality bent. The Syndicate Energy Commission building stood 23 blocks from the park. 47 stories of reinforced concrete and steel. Hub of power distribution for the entire eastern sector. Home to 600 employees who processed the quotas and tariffs that kept the city's electrical infrastructure under Syndicate control. It had security systems designed to withstand siege warfare. Blast doors, fail-safes, backup generators that could run independently for 6 months. None of it mattered. Beerus's hand closed. Not into a fist, just closed fingers touching palm in a gesture that might have been dismissive. The Energy Commission building didn't explode. It didn't collapse. It didn't burn. It ceased. The transition took perhaps 2 seconds. Long enough for people in neighboring buildings to look up. Not long enough for anyone to understand what they were seeing. The building became translucent, then transparent. Then a wireframe outline that lasted half a heartbeat. Before that too faded, leaving nothing but empty space, where 47 stories of architecture and infrastructure and 600 human lives had existed moments before. No debris, no dust, no sound of collapse. Just absence. The space where the building had been didn't even have disturbed air. Wind moved through it like it had always been empty, like the building was a memory that reality had forgotten. In the operations room, every alarm triggered simultaneously. Report! Ultraman's voice cut through the chaos. Energy Commission building, it's... The technician's hands moved across controls, pulling feeds that showed nothing. It's gone. Define gone. Not there. Not destroyed. Just not there. Sensors read empty space. Historical data confirms a building existed at those coordinates until approximately 8 seconds ago. Current data shows nothing. Owlman's fingers flew across his interface. Satellite imaging, structural databases, thermal scans, all of them agreed. Where the Energy Commission building had stood, there was now a perfectly rectangular void in the city's architecture. Casualties? Superwoman asked. Unknown. We can't find any bodies. We can't find any debris. We can't find evidence that anything ever occupied that space except air. 600 people, Johnny Quick said. His speed formula ran through his head on repeat, a useless calculation that kept returning the same answer. Too slow. He would always be too slow. 600 people just erased, Owlman finished. Not killed. Erased. Removed from the current state of reality. Power Ring's hand shook. The emerald glow pulsed arrhythmically. Voltoom's voice was barely a whisper. Jurisdiction. He has jurisdiction. We pulled something that has authority over whether things get to exist. Can we reverse it? Ultraman demanded. With what? Owlman's voice was very calm, very controlled. We don't have technology that manipulates existence itself. We have weapons. We have power. But that... He gestured to the feed showing empty space. That's not power. That's a fundamental law acting through a form that bothered to give us warning. Warning. Superwoman turned from the window. That was a warning. He could have erased the entire city. He erased a building. Specifically, precisely, with enough control to leave everything around it untouched. Owlman pulled up architectural data. The structures on either side are intact. Power lines that ran through that building simply terminate in mid-air. The subway tunnel underneath is sealed at both ends by what sensors describe as conceptual absence. He didn't destroy infrastructure. He removed it from the equation. The room went quiet except for the hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the city beginning to react. Emergency services were already responding, not to rescue anyone. There was no one to rescue. They responded because protocols existed, and following protocols meant someone could be blamed when those protocols failed. News feeds lit up. Footage from a dozen angles showing the impossible. A building that had been there and now wasn't. Commentators struggled for words. Politicians demanded answers. And in executive boardrooms across the city, people recalculated risk assessments and updated insurance claims and began the process of pretending this was a manageable crisis. Earth 3 didn't mourn. It adapted. Stock markets opened 6 minutes late. Trading resumed after brief volatility. The Energy Commission's functions were distributed to 3 subsidiary organizations within the hour. Personnel records were flagged as lost to operational incident, and compensation packages were processed for next of kin who would receive credits that wouldn't quite cover funeral costs for bodies that didn't exist. By noon, the official story was infrastructure failure. A catastrophic malfunction in experimental spatial compression technology. Tragic, unavoidable, under investigation. No one believed it. Everyone repeated it. Belief was irrelevant. The official narrative was what got entered into reports and databases and historical records, and unofficial truth was just noise that threatened quarterly profits. But in the offices and boardrooms and planning sessions across the city, people looked at the empty space on their maps and understood something fundamental had changed. There were things in the city now that couldn't be taxed or threatened or negotiated with. Things that could simply decide you didn't get to exist anymore, and the universe would comply. In the park, Beerus sat down again. The food carts sat untouched. He closed his eyes. Better, he said to no one. The city was quieter now. Not in volume, in presumption. It had learned that existence was conditional. That was a start. In the Syndicate tower, Owlman stared at the empty space on his displays. His mind worked through implications, threat assessments, response protocols. Every scenario he ran ended the same way. They couldn't fight this. They couldn't negotiate with it. They couldn't escape it. The only option was to make it leave willingly, or find a way to contain it. We need contingencies, he said. Contingencies for what? Ultraman's fists were clenched. For an enemy we can't touch, for a weapon we can't counter, for a force that operates outside our framework. Owlman pulled up schematics, power grids, dimensional equipment, Quartian technology. We pulled it here. There has to be a way to push it back. And if there isn't, Owlman looked at the empty space where 600 people and 47 stories of concrete had been. The void was perfectly clean, perfectly precise. The work of something that erased with the same casual efficiency that Earth 3 used to exploit. Then we learn to stop irritating it, he said, and hope it gets bored before it decides we're too loud to ignore. Superwoman moved to the communications console. I'll coordinate damage control. The official story needs to be consistent. Make it something people can accept, Owlman said. Not the truth. Something that lets them sleep. She nodded, began typing. The narrative would spread within hours. Infrastructure failure. Tragic accident. Compensation pending. No one would believe it, but belief wasn't the goal. The goal was giving people permission to stop asking questions. Johnny quick-paced, not running, just moving. A nervous energy that had nowhere to go. So we just let him sit there, let him erase whatever he wants. For now, Owlman said. Until we understand what we're dealing with. We know what we're dealing with. A threat that needs to be eliminated. No. Power Ring's voice was quiet, but certain. We're dealing with something that decides what gets eliminated. There's a difference. Volthum's whisper confirmed it. He's not in our reality. He's adjacent to it, touching it. We can't eliminate him because elimination is his function. Fighting him is like fighting gravity. You don't win, you just fall. Ultraman slammed his hand into the console. The metal bent. I don't accept that. Acceptance is irrelevant, Owlman said. Survival requires acknowledging facts regardless of preference. The fact is we have an entity in our city with a demonstrated ability to erase matter energy and everything in between. The fact is we brought him here. The fact is he's annoyed. Then we make him not annoyed. How more food? He just erased a building because the last food tasted wrong. Then we find food that tastes right. We find whatever he wants and we give it to him until he leaves. Owlman looked at his partner, at the frustration in Ultraman's posture, the refusal to accept limitations. It was the same attitude that had made them powerful. The same attitude that would get them erased if they didn't adapt. That might work, Owlman said carefully. If we knew what he wanted, he wants quiet. He said it himself. He wants us to be quiet. To stop pulling on things we don't understand. To stop making noise he has to notice. Owlman pulled up the lattice schematics again. We shut down the dimensional siphon. We provided food. We left him alone, and he still erased a building. Why? Because the food was wrong. Because we took it from people by force. Because he could taste the fear in it. Owlman looked at the empty space on his screen. He doesn't want tribute. He wants us to understand that tribute is meaningless to something that can simply take or destroy as it pleases. The implications settled like frost. They had built an empire on the principle that force created legitimacy. That power justified itself. That the strong took what they wanted and the weak provided or perished. And now something had entered their reality that made their entire framework irrelevant. Something that didn't take, didn't negotiate, just decided whether things continued existing and acted accordingly. So what do? Superwoman asked. Owlman's hands moved across his console. Pulling files. Cross-referencing data. Building contingencies for scenarios that might not have solutions. We adapt, he said. We study him, we find his limits, we discover what he values, and we build leverage from that. And if he doesn't value anything, Owlman didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air with the weight of existential threat. Then we make ourselves valuable, he said finally. Or we make ourselves invisible. Because the alternative is learning exactly how thoroughly something can be erased when a god of destruction decides it's too loud. Outside in the park, Beerus sat beneath his tree and waited. The city had learned a lesson. Whether they'd learned the right lesson remained to be seen, but they had time. He wasn't in a hurry. Patience was easy when you were the only thing in the room that didn't need permission to exist. The city adjusted its spreadsheets. Reality adjusted its margins. and something that had once been considered untouchable no longer existed except as a gap in the skyline and a line item marked total loss in actuarial tables that would take months to finalize. The city developed ticks, small ones at first. Clocks in the eastern sector ran 3 seconds slow. Compasses pointed 2 degrees off true north. Satellites passing over the park where Beerus sat lost signal lock for exactly 7 seconds, returning online with corrupted timestamps and spatial data that suggested they'd been somewhere else entirely. The disruptions weren't consistent enough to be weaponized, just persistent enough to be documented. Owlman's teams compiled reports. Atmospheric pressure fluctuations, localized gravitational anomalies, energy readings that spiked without apparent source, then dissipated into patterns the instruments couldn't classify. None of it traced to action. Beerus sat. Beerus slept. Beerus occasionally moved from one spot to another, without appearing to traverse the distance between them. The city adjusted around him, the way water adjusted around a stone, and the adjustments left ripples that propagated through infrastructure designed on the assumption that physics was consistent. "He's not doing anything," the monitoring chief reported. "But space around him is doing plenty." Owlman studied the readings. Spatial compression that wasn't gravity. Energy displacement that wasn't radiation. The entity existed, and reality bent to accommodate that existence, which suggested the problem wasn't what Beerus might do. The problem was what he was. "Initiate remote observation protocol," Owlman said. The first drone lasted 4 seconds. It approached to within 200 meters before its guidance systems registered impossible coordinates and tried to course correct into a position that didn't exist. The resulting cascade failure looked like standard mechanical breakdown. The telemetry told a different story. The drone hadn't malfunctioned. It had encountered a region where the rules governing its operation stopped being relevant. The second drone, equipped with shielded instruments and quantum-locked navigation, made it to 100 meters before its atomic clock desynchronized by 47 minutes in the span of 3 seconds. Time dilation without velocity. Relativistic effects without approaching light speed. The third drone didn't return data. It transmitted for 6 seconds, then stopped. Not damaged, not destroyed. Just stopped, as if someone had reached into its programming and deleted the concept of continuation. "Analysis," Ultraman demanded. "The drones aren't being attacked," a technician said carefully. "They're encountering zones where their operational parameters become undefined. Like trying to run software designed for one reality in a space that runs on different physics." "He's changing the laws of physics." "No. He's existing according to different ones. And when our technology gets close enough, it has to choose which set of laws to obey. It chooses wrong." Superwoman watched the feeds from 3 failed observation attempts. "What about biological approach, living subjects?" Owlman pulled up containment records. Subjects acquired through various channels, test personnel, people who'd made the mistake of being useful to science and inconvenient to society. Earth 3 didn't waste resources on ethical debates when practical experimentation was available. Subject 17 was a meta-human with adaptive physiology. Regeneration, environmental resistance, useful for toxin testing before the Syndicate had exhausted his novelty and relegated him to more aggressive research protocols. They released him 3 blocks from the park with a simple directive transmitted via cortical implant. Approach the entity. Establish visual contact. Survive as long as possible. Subject 17 made it to the park entrance before his implant registered distress. Not pain. Confusion. His adaptive systems were trying to compensate for environmental conditions that kept changing. Air pressure that fluctuated with no atmospheric cause. Temperature gradients that defied thermodynamic distribution. Gravity that pulled in directions that weren't down. He took 3 more steps. 4. His regeneration tried to account for cellular stress from conditions that shouldn't exist. tried to adapt to rules that were rewriting themselves faster than biology could compensate. At 30 meters from where Beerus sat, Subject 17 stopped moving. Not dead, not injured, simply unable to process the contradiction between where he was and what his body reported about where he was. His nervous system locked, attempting to reconcile input that violated every survival protocol evolution had written into his genes. He stood there for 11 minutes before collapsing. When recovery teams retrieved him, his vitals were stable, but his brain activity showed patterns consistent with someone trapped in a loop trying to solve an equation with no solution. Physiological approach failed, Owlman noted. Whatever field surrounds the entity rejects biological systems the same way it rejects mechanical ones. Then we use energy, Ultraman said. Direct application of force. See if there's a threshold. Owlman had expected this, hoped to avoid it. But Ultraman's patience had limits, and they'd been testing those limits for 3 days. The Syndicate had directed energy weapons. Particle beams designed to punch through reinforced bunkers. They'd never been fired in the city. Too much collateral, too many assets at risk. But Ultraman wanted a demonstration, and what Ultraman wanted typically happened. The beam array positioned itself on a building 7 blocks from the park. Automated targeting, remote activation, minimal personnel exposure. The weapon charged for 43 seconds, drawing power from the grid in a surge that briefly dimmed lights across the eastern sector. The beam fired, coherent energy traveling at relativistic speed. Enough force to vaporize a city block. The calculations were precise. The targeting was perfect. The beam should have intersected Beerus's position with devastating effect. It didn't. The beam reached to within 50 meters of the entity and stopped. Not reflected. Not absorbed. Just stopped as if it had encountered a wall that existed purely as the concept of termination. The energy hung in space for a heartbeat, a frozen column of light that physics said shouldn't be able to freeze. Then it dissipated. Not dramatically. It just ceased being relevant the way a question becomes irrelevant once you realize you're asking the wrong thing. Beerus didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the attempt. Continued sitting beneath his tree as if the city hadn't just tried to erase him with enough power to crack open a vault. Readings, Owlman said quietly. Energy dispersed across dimensional frequencies we can't measure. It's like shooting a gun at a mirror, except the mirror is made of the concept of your gun not working. Ultraman's jaw tightened. Again, double the output. That will drain the eastern grid completely. We'll have blackouts across. Again, the weapon recharged. Slower this time. Drawing power it wasn't designed to channel continuously. The second shot was mathematically guaranteed to overwhelm any shielding technology known to Earth-3's scientific community. The result was identical. The beam stopped. The energy dispersed. Beerus sat undisturbed, and something in Ultraman's expression shifted from tactical frustration to personal offense. He's not even defending himself, Ultraman said. His voice carried the dangerous calm that preceded violence. He's just sitting there, like we're not even worth acknowledging. Perhaps we're not, Owlman said. Then I'll make him acknowledge us. Don't! Owlman's tone sharpened. We don't have enough data. We don't understand the mechanism. Engaging directly is what needs to happen. We've tested from range. We've tested with machines and subjects and energy. All of it bounced off or failed. Fine. Time to test with something that doesn't bounce. You can't guarantee you'll survive proximity. I can guarantee I'll get answers. In the monitoring station, Power Ring's hand trembled against the console. The emerald glow from his ring had dimmed to almost nothing over the past hour. Voltoom's voice was a constant whisper now, but the tone had changed from predatory interest to something that might have been fear. He needs to stop, Voltoom said. Tell him to stop. Disconnect. Leave. Run. Anything but this. Ultraman doesn't run, Power Ring muttered. Then Ultraman dies. And when he dies, everyone in this building dies. And when this building dies, the entity will notice it was necessary to kill something, and that necessity will irritate him, and he'll erase this entire cursed planet just to restore quiet. You're afraid. I'm realistic. This thing isn't a threat you can fight. It's a law you can only obey or violate. Violation has one outcome. Power Ring looked at his ring. The entity that had dominated him for months. The ancient intelligence that had consumed Green Lanterns and broken heroes, now reduced to begging him to flee from something it couldn't comprehend. What is he? Power Ring asked. Permission, Volthoom whispered. Walking, breathing permission over whether matter gets to continue being matter. We're inside his jurisdiction. We pulled him here, and jurisdiction doesn't negotiate. Superwoman stepped closer to Ultraman, not blocking him, standing with him. If you're going, she said, go smart, not angry. Anger makes you predictable. I'm not angry, I'm curious. Ultraman cracked his knuckles. Let's see if a god can bleed. He's not a god, Owlman said. Gods serve something? This thing serves nothing. Then what is it? Owlman looked at the readings. The spatial distortions, the temporal anomalies, the way reality itself seemed to be accommodating something that shouldn't fit within its rules. He thought about the building that had been erased, the drones that had stopped functioning, the energy beams that had simply ceased being relevant. Maintenance, Owlman said quietly. We're dealing with a maintenance process. The universe's way of removing problems. And we made ourselves a problem by pulling on things we didn't understand. Then I'll unmake myself a solution. Ultraman left the operations room, not stomping, not raging, moving with the focused purpose of someone who'd made a decision and would see it through regardless of consequence. Johnny Quick watched him go, ran calculations, ran them again. Every scenario ended with Ultraman learning a lesson the hard way. Should we stop him? Should we stop? How Superwoman asked. Fair point. Owlman's fingers moved across his console, redirecting monitoring assets, positioning medical response teams, updating contingency protocols for scenarios ranging from minor humiliation to total erasure of Eastern Sector. Record everything, he said. Whatever happens next, we need to understand it. The park sat empty except for two figures. Beerus beneath his tree eyes closed. Ultraman landing 30 meters away, with enough force to crack pavement. The city held its breath. Not metaphorically. Atmospheric sensors registered a pressure drop, as if the air itself was waiting to see what happened when Earth 3's symbol of dominance confronted something that existed outside every framework that had made that dominance possible. Ultraman stood, assessed. Beerus didn't move, didn't open his eyes, gave no indication he'd noticed an arrival that had registered on seismic monitors across 6 city blocks. You've made your point, Ultraman said. His voice carried across the empty park. You're powerful. You can erase things, we understand. But this is my city, my world. And I don't share territory with things that won't explain themselves. Beerus opened one eye. The gesture was minimal. Just one eye half-lidded looking at Ultraman with the sort of attention someone might give to a moderately interesting insect. Loud, Beerus said. What? You're being loud. Beerus closed his eye again. Stop it. The dismissal was absolute. Not hostile, not threatened, just bored. As if Ultraman's presence registered somewhere below the threshold of relevance, and the only notable thing about it was the noise. Ultraman felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not quite. Just the sudden understanding that every assumption he'd built his identity on might be wrong. I'm not here to be dismissed, he said. Then leave. This is my city. Wrong. This is a city you control. Control isn't ownership. Ownership requires permission. Beerus's voice remained flat. You don't have permission. I don't need permission. I take what I want. Then try. The invitation hung in the air. Not a challenge. Not a taunt. Just a simple observation that if Ultraman believed he could take something from an entity that existed outside the concept of taking, he was welcome to discover why that belief was incorrect. Ultraman's fists clenched. Every instinct said attack. Every tactical assessment said wait. The contradiction built pressure behind his eyes, a rage that had nowhere safe to discharge. One question, Ultraman said. Can you bleed? Beerus opened both eyes, looked at Ultraman fully for the first time. His expression didn't change, but something in the quality of his attention shifted. From dismissal to evaluation. From ignoring to deciding. Do you want to find out? The question carried implications. Not about whether Beerus could bleed. About whether Ultraman understood what asking that question would cost. In the operations room, Owlman watched through satellite feeds that barely maintained coherence on the park. His hand hovered over abort protocols that probably wouldn't matter. If this went wrong, there wouldn't be time for evacuation. There would just be a very precise removal of everything in a radius that included most of the city's critical infrastructure. Tell me you have a plan, Johnny Quick said. I have 17 plans, Owlman replied. None of them account for what happens if Ultraman actually attacks. He won't. You sure? No. The silence stretched. In the park, Ultraman and Beerus faced each other across a distance that was simultaneously 30 meters and unbridgeable. The city's sensors registered increasing spatial distortion. Energy readings spiked without source. Somewhere deep in the Quardian core, instruments detected a resonance that shouldn't exist between antimatter matrices and whatever field surrounded the entity in the park. Volthum's whisper became frantic. Disconnect! Now, before proximity alone kills us. I can't disconnect us, Power Ring said. You won't let me. I'm letting you. I'm begging you. This thing isn't part of any equation I understand. It's the answer that makes all equations irrelevant. If Ultraman attacks, we need to be somewhere else when the retaliation arrives. What retaliation? Existence itself, reality correcting an error. In the park, Ultraman made his decision. He didn't attack. Not yet. But his posture shifted. Muscles coiled. Power gathered. The preparation for violence, so obvious it might as well have been spoken. Beerus stood. The motion was casual. Unhurried. Just standing up from sitting, a movement that should have meant nothing. The air pressure dropped 6 millibars in 2 seconds. Every sensor within a kilometer registered the change. Animals in the park's boundaries fled. Plants bent as if in wind that wasn't there. Beerus looked at Ultraman with an expression that might have been interest or might have been the final assessment before a decision. You want to test strength, Beerus said. Fine, I'm bored anyway. He raised one hand. Not in threat, not in aggression, just raised it palm open, a gesture that might precede a handshake or a greeting. Hit me, Beerus said. Once, with everything you have. Show me what powerful means to you. The invitation was genuine. No mockery in the tone, just curiosity. The same curiosity someone might have about what a particularly interesting insect would do if you provided it optimal conditions. Ultraman hesitated. This was a trap. Had to be. Nothing offered free attacks unless those attacks were meaningless. And if they were meaningless, then accepting the offer was admitting weakness. But refusing was worse. One hit, Ultraman said. One hit, then we see if you're interesting or just loud. Ultraman gathered power. Drew on every reserve. Every enhancement, every modification that had made him more than human, more than Kryptonian, more than anything Earth-3 had produced before him. He moved faster than sound, faster than most sensors could track. A punch that carried enough force to level buildings, to crack continental shelves, to reshape geography. The impact registered as a pressure wave that shattered windows across 4 blocks. Beerus stood unmoved, not braced, not straining. Just standing there, palms still raised, having absorbed a blow that should have sent him through 3 buildings and into the harbor beyond. He looked at his hand, at Ultraman's fist pressed against it. His expression shifted slightly. Not impressed, just confirming a suspicion. "That's it?" Beerus asked. And in that moment, Ultraman understood exactly how far outside his weight class he'd wandered. Beerus lowered his hand. Ultraman staggered back not from force, but from the sudden absence of the resistance that had been there, like punching a wall and having the wall simply stop existing mid-impact. "Adequate," Beerus said. His tone carried the same assessment he'd given to the food. Not insulting, not impressed, just marking something as meeting minimum standards for notice. "Not interesting, but adequate. You're strong for furniture." The word hit harder than any physical blow could have. Furniture. Ultraman opened his mouth, closed it. Every comeback died before reaching his throat, because what could you say to something that had just tanked your best hit and categorized you as decor? "I have a question for you," Beerus said. He walked past Ultraman, not avoiding him, just moving through space that Ultraman happened to occupy, and somehow Ultraman found himself stepping aside. "This city, these buildings, these people. Why? Why what? Why do you control them? What's the purpose? Power, resources, territory. And what do you do with power once you have it?" Ultraman didn't have an answer. The question had never occurred to him. You took power because power was the point. You controlled because control was victory. The purpose was self-evident. "Nothing," Beerus said. "You accumulate, you dominate. You sit on top of everything and call it achievement. And it bores me." He walked back to his tree, sat down, closed his eyes. "Leave," he said, "before I decide you're too loud after all." Ultraman stood in the center of the park. Every instinct screamed to attack again, to rage, to prove that he was more than adequate, more than furniture, more than something to be dismissed. But underneath the rage was something colder. The understanding that attacking again would prove Beerus's assessment correct. That furniture didn't fight back. It just got removed when it stopped being useful. He left, not flying, walking, each step measured, controlled. The walk of someone who just learned that strength had categories he didn't reach and never would. In the operations room, Owlman watched Ultraman's retreating figure, watched Beerus settle back into position beneath his tree, watched the city's sensors slowly return to baseline as spatial distortions faded. "Assessment," Superwoman said quietly. "We can't fight him," Owlman said. "We can't negotiate with him. We can't ignore him. The standard tools don't apply." "Then what do we do?" Owlman pulled up the Quartian lattice schematics, the dimensional siphon that had pulled Beerus here in the first place, the technology they'd built to extract energy from other realities. "We changed the question," he said. "We're not trying to defeat him. We're trying to survive him. And if we can't survive him here, we need to make him not here. Send him back, contain him, lock him, put him somewhere that his presence doesn't destabilize our entire operational framework." Owlman's fingers moved across calculations. "We pulled him through dimensional resonance. There has to be a way to push him back, or trap him between spaces where his existence becomes someone else's problem." Johnny Quick looked at the calculations forming on the screen. "That's a long shot. Long shots are all we have. The alternative is waiting for him to get bored and erase us for being too loud." Power Ring's ring pulsed weakly. Voltum's voice was barely a whisper now. "He's not going to get bored. He's going to get annoyed. And when he gets annoyed, definitions like city and planet stop mattering to him." "Then we don't annoy him," Owlman said. "We contain him, quietly, efficiently, before he notices we're trying." Outside, a satellite passed over the park. For exactly 7 seconds, it registered coordinates that placed it simultaneously in orbit and underground. When the malfunction cleared, The satellite's atomic clock had jumped forward by 3 hours. Nothing attacked Beerus. Nothing survived proximity to him either. The city learned to route around the park the way water routes around stone. And in the Syndicate Tower, plans formed for scenarios that required either perfect execution or perfect irrelevance, because anything between those extremes meant learning exactly how thoroughly something could be removed when it stopped being adequate and started being loud. The trap took 62 hours to build, not physically. The components had existed for months, scattered across facilities that crime syndicate front companies operated under names that changed quarterly. Dimensional anchors, spatial compression matrices, energy absorption fields adapted from Quartian technology that had cost 3 governments and 47 scientists to acquire. The construction was simple, the theory was elegant, the execution would be flawless. Alman stood in the operations center reviewing schematics that represented the culmination of every observation they'd made about the entity. Every sensor reading, every failed test, every spatial anomaly, all of it fed into equations that suggested one approach that might work. Not defeat, not destruction, containment. "Walk me through it again," Superwoman said. Alman pulled up the holographic display. 3 concentric barriers. The outer layer is power rings constructs calibrated to dimensional frequencies that resonate with antimatter signatures. Not to harm, but to define space, to create a boundary. Green light flickered across the display, forming a sphere. The middle layer is Johnny Quick. Speed formula creates temporal displacement, not to stop time, but to create friction. Make every second the entity experiences stretch into minutes. Slow him down without him noticing he's being slowed. Yellow streaks circled the green sphere. The inner layer is energy absorption, not attacking, just drinking. Every output he produces gets siphoned into the Quartian core. We're not trying to hurt him. We're trying to make him work for every action, until working becomes more irritating than leaving. Red patterns wove through the other 2 layers, forming a lattice that looked almost beautiful in its complexity. "And if he just erases it?" Ultraman asked. His tone carried the flat certainty of someone who'd learned exactly one lesson and planned to apply it universally. "Then we learn what triggers his erasure threshold, and we don't cross it again." Owlman minimized the display. "But if we do nothing, we're waiting for him to decide we're too loud. At least this way, we're active participants in our survival. Or we irritate him into erasing the city. Possible. But he's had 3 days to erase the city, and hasn't. He erases when boundaries are crossed, when disrespect becomes excessive, when fear ruins his food." Owlman's fingers drummed once against the console. "We're not attacking. We're relocating, suggesting very politely that he might be more comfortable somewhere that isn't our operational headquarters." Power rings stood near the back of the room, both hands gripping the railing. The ring's glow was unstable, pulsing like a failing heartbeat. Volthoom had been quiet for 6 hours. Not silent, just quiet in the way something is quiet when it's conserving energy for survival. "The ring can't hold that configuration for long," Power Ring said. "Maybe 3 minutes. 5 if I'm willing to let Volthoom burn through reserves that aren't his to burn. 3 minutes is enough. We're not imprisoning him. We're encouraging relocation. And if he doesn't relocate, then we abort. Fall back. Adjust parameters." Owlman pulled up contingency protocols. "This is a probe, not an assault. We test boundaries. We learn. We adapt." Johnny Quick vibrated in place. The motion was constant now, a nervous habit that had become automatic. "When do we deploy?" "Sunset. When foot traffic is minimal. When observation is difficult. When he's most likely to be stationary." "You're assuming he sleeps." "I'm assuming he experiences something analogous to rest. Every biological and semi-biological entity we've documented has down periods. If he has them, sunset is most probable." Ultraman crossed his arms. "And my role, observe. If the trap fails catastrophically, you evacuate assets. You don't engage. I don't run. You prioritize strategic value over ego. That's not running, that's command. The distinction was razor thin and both of them knew it. But Ultraman had learned enough in the park to know that there were fights you couldn't win by hitting harder. And the admission cost him something visible in his posture. "Fine," he said. "I'll babysit the retreat." 4 hours later, the sun began its descent over a city that had developed new reflexes. People avoided the park. Delivery routes adjusted. Even crime had patterns now flowing around the eastern sector like water around a drain. In the park, Beerus sat beneath his tree, eyes closed, breathing so subtle it barely registered on thermal scans. The grass around him had stopped growing 3 days ago. Not dead. Just paused as if waiting for permission to continue being grass. The deployment began at 1847. Power Ring moved first. Not into the park, around it. His ring flared green, brighter than it had been in days, drawing on reserves that Voltoom had been hoarding. The constructs formed in layers, not walls. Membranes. Translucent barriers that existed more as concept than matter. Each one tuned to frequencies that the Quardian technology had identified as relevant to whatever dimensional space the entity partially occupied. The barriers enclosed the park in a sphere 300 meters in diameter. Not touching anything, just present, defining. Johnny Quick moved second. Speed formula ran through his mind like prayer, like mathematics, like the only language that mattered when you were trying to make seconds last longer than physics allowed. He ran, circles within circles, each lap creating wake turbulence that folded time back on itself in microscopic increments. Not stopping time, just making it work harder to pass. The energy absorption arrays activated third. Buried in buildings surrounding the park, dormant for months, hidden in infrastructure waiting for this exact configuration. They didn't pull. They just made themselves available. Open mouths, ready to drink whatever the entity produced. The trap closed. 3 layers, 3 mechanisms. 3 ways to suggest very carefully that staying here was less comfortable than leaving. For 7 seconds, nothing happened. Beerus sat beneath his tree unchanged. The barriers hummed. The temporal displacement held. The absorption fields waited. Then Beerus opened one eye. Not quickly, not in alarm. Just the slow acknowledgement of someone noticing something mildly unusual and deciding whether it warranted full attention. He looked at the green barriers, at the temporal distortion, at the energy fields creating a cage of polite suggestion around him. "Interesting," he said. In the operations room, every screen showed telemetry from 3 different systems, all reporting nominal function. The trap was holding. The layers were stable. The entity was contained within parameters that had taken 62 hours to calculate and 6 months to build. "Status," Owlman said. "Green layer stable. Construct integrity at 94%. Power ring reports strain but manageable. Temporal displacement functioning within tolerances. Quick is maintaining the lap pattern. Time dilation reading at 1:47 ratio. Energy absorption arrays online and receptive. No output detected yet." Owlman watched the feeds. Watched Beerus sitting calmly within a trap that represented the best strategic thinking Earth-3 could produce. Watched and waited for the response that would tell them whether they'd found a boundary or crossed one. Beerus stood. The motion was casual. Just standing up, stretching slightly, looking around at the architecture of energy and intention that surrounded him. "You tried drones," he said. Not to anyone in particular. Just observing. "You tried weapons. You tried sending your strongest to punch me. Now you try this. Boxes within boxes. Clever." He walked toward the nearest green barrier. Not aggressive, just curious. His hand extended fingers reaching toward the construct membrane that Power Ring was maintaining through force of will and Voltoom's reserves. "Don't touch it," Power Ring muttered, though no one could hear him. "Please don't touch it." Beerus's finger made contact. The construct held for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough for everyone watching to believe it might work. long enough for hope to form. Then it didn't hold anymore. Not shattered, not broken, just stopped being relevant. The membrane wasn't destroyed. It just ceased having meaning in the context of something that existed partially outside the dimensional frequencies. The construct was tuned to recognize. The green layer failed in a cascade. Each membrane collapsing not from force, but from logical impossibility. Like trying to catch water with a net made of mathematics. Power Ring gasped. The feedback hit him like voltage. Volthoom screamed a sound only Power Ring could hear. High and terrible and afraid. He's not rejecting it, Volthoom said. He's correcting it. Making reality remember that traps don't work on maintenance functions. The temporal displacement lasted longer. Johnny Quick ran faster, pushed harder, fed more of himself into the speed formula that was supposed to make time negotiable. For 11 seconds, he held it. Made every second Beerus experienced cost him minutes of subjective time. Beerus walked through it like walking through fog, not fighting the displacement, not resisting it, just existing according to rules that temporal manipulation didn't govern. Time slowed around him. Time meant nothing to him. The distinction made the trap pointless. Johnny Quick collapsed, not from injury, from the simple physiological fact that his body had just run the equivalent of 300 miles in 11 seconds. And the speed formula, for all its power, couldn't make muscles forget they had limits. The energy absorption fields activated desperately, drinking, pulling, trying to siphon something, anything, from an entity that had to produce energy if it moved, if it existed, if it breathed. They detected nothing. Not because Beerus wasn't producing energy. Because the energy he produced existed in categories the fields weren't designed to recognize, like trying to drink light with a sponge made for water. The fields overloaded. Not from excess, from confusion. Systems designed to absorb energy encountering something that was energy, but also existed outside energy's rules, also made the concept of absorption irrelevant. The trap failed. All 3 layers. All 62 hours of planning. All 6 months of preparation. Failed. Not because Beerus destroyed them, but because he walked through them, like walking through smoke, and smoke didn't stop anything that didn't need air. Beerus reached the edge of the park, stopped, turned back toward the Syndicate tower. "You keep trying to solve me," he said. His voice carried across the distance, despite no mechanism for carrying it. "Like I'm a problem with an answer. I'm not." He raised one hand. Not threatening, not aggressive. Just lifted it palm open, the same gesture he'd used when inviting Ultraman to hit him. Reality rippled, not dramatically. Just a slight distortion like heat haze spreading from his palm in a wave that moved faster than sensors could track. In the operations room, every screen went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When they came back online, the Quardian core was offline. Not damaged, not destroyed. Just offline, as if someone had reached into its fundamental operating principles and switched it to a state that meant not currently relevant. "Report," Ultraman demanded. "Core is dormant, not broken, not powered down, just not participating in causality right now." The technician's hands moved across controls that responded perfectly, but changed nothing. It's like the machine forgot how to be a machine. Owlman stared at the readings. At the core that had cost 6 governments to build 47 scientists to operate and 3 years to integrate into their infrastructure. Offline. Not through damage, but through being politely informed that its function was temporarily suspended. He didn't break it, Owlman said quietly. Then what did he do? He revoked its permission to work. The implication settled like cold water. They'd built a trap using the most sophisticated technology Earth-3 possessed. The entity had walked through it, then reached across 6 city blocks and turned off their most powerful asset without touching it, without threatening it, without acknowledging it as a threat worth destroying. Just decided it didn't get to function right now. Power ring collapsed. The ring's glow died to almost nothing. Voltum's presence in his mind went silent, not from fear, but from something beyond fear. The understanding that they'd just tested something that had the authority to decide whether their abilities got to exist. And that authority had looked at their best effort and found it adequately amusing to not erase them for trying. Beerus walked back to his tree, sat down, closed his eyes. "Better?" he said. In the operations room, silence dominated. Not the silence of planning or regrouping. The silence of people confronting a truth they'd been avoiding. "Options," Ultraman said finally. "We don't have options." Owlman's voice was very calm, very controlled. "We have reactions. We can try again and get similar results. We can do nothing and hope he leaves. We can evacuate and cede territory. None of those are options. They're just different ways of acknowledging we've lost. We haven't lost. We're still standing. We're standing because he's letting us stand. The moment that changes, we won't have time to notice we've stopped." Superwoman pulled up damage assessments. "Casualties? None. Quick will recover. Power ring is stable. The core can be reactivated once whatever he did wears off." "Will it wear off?" Owlman didn't answer. The question assumed that whatever Beerus had done operated on time frames they understood. That it was temporary. That it could be reversed. None of those assumptions felt safe anymore. "We need a new approach," Owlman said. "Everything we've tried has been about force. Direct or indirect, but force. And force doesn't work on something that has authority over whether force gets to exist." "Then what does work?" "I don't know. But I know what doesn't. We just spent 62 hours and 6 months of preparation confirming it." Johnny Quick limped into the operations room supported by medical staff. His legs shook. His speed formula had burned through reserves he'd need weeks to rebuild. "Did we at least learn something?" "Yes," Owlman said. "We learned that he's not fighting us. He's correcting us. Like we're errors in a system he's maintaining. And errors don't negotiate with the debugger." Power ring sat against the wall ring arm, hanging limp. The emerald glow was barely visible now. Voltum's voice was a whisper barely coherent. "He could have erased us," Voltum said. "Any of the layers, any of us. He could have decided we didn't get to exist anymore, and we wouldn't. He didn't. Why? Because we're not important enough to erase," Power ring said. "We're just loud. Then we need to be quiet." "We tried quiet. He erased a building. That building was built on fear, on exploitation, on systems he found distasteful." Voltum's presence flickered. "Maybe quiet isn't enough. Maybe we need to be absent." In the park, Beerus sat beneath his tree while the city learned new boundaries. Systems recalibrated, sensors adjusted, and in planning rooms across the Syndicate's infrastructure, people began calculating the cost of evacuation versus the cost of staying near something that could revoke their permission to operate at any moment. The trap had failed, not because it was poorly designed, not because it was inadequately powered, but because it had tried to constrain something that existed as the authority that decided what constraints meant. Owlman looked at the darkened core, at the collapsed barriers, at the team that had given everything to a plan that had worked perfectly and failed completely. "New priority," he said. "Find out what he values, what he wants, what he'll accept in exchange for leaving. And if he doesn't want anything, then we find out what irritates him least, and we become that. Because the alternative is discovering exactly how thoroughly he can erase things when they cross from loud to intolerable." Outside, the sun set over a city that had learned it wasn't the predator it thought it was. And in the park, something that looked vaguely like a purple cat sat beneath a tree and decided that the noise was getting quieter. Not quiet enough yet, but quieter. That was progress. The Quardian core remained offline, not broken, just reminded that its function was conditional. That everything's function, was conditional. And the only thing that determined those conditions was sitting beneath a tree, eyes closed, waiting to see if the furniture would learn to stop trying to rearrange itself around him. The city stopped pretending it was normal on the fourth day. Not dramatically. No announcements. No official acknowledgement. Just a quiet adjustment in how things operated. Delivery routes avoided the eastern sector entirely now. Power grids rerouted around nodes that had become unreliable. Emergency services updated their protocols with a new designation for incidents that didn't fit existing categories. Code null. Not hostile, not natural disaster. Just areas where standard operational procedures stopped applying for reasons that couldn't be documented in ways that made sense. The park sat empty. Not abandoned. Avoided. People walked past and their eyes slid away from it, like trying to look at something through the wrong end of a telescope. Not all of them noticed. Some did and kept walking anyway, because noticing meant asking questions, and questions meant becoming visible to things that valued quiet. Beerus sat beneath his tree. Had been sitting there for 96 hours, with breaks only to change position or express mild displeasure when the city got too loud. No food, no water, no biological needs that sensors could detect. Just presence constant and undeniable, like a law of physics that had taken the shape of something vaguely feline and deeply indifferent. The monitoring teams had given up trying to track him continuously. The sensors couldn't maintain focus. The instruments returned data that violated their calibration. Better to check periodically and hope he stayed where he was. In the Syndicate tower, exhaustion had become a permanent state, not the physical kind, the existential kind. The weariness that came from spending 4 days trying to solve a problem that kept revealing itself to be categorically unsolvable. Owlman hadn't slept. Didn't dare. Sleep meant giving his unconscious mind time to process what his conscious mind was refusing to accept. That every model he'd built was wrong. That intelligence was a tool that only worked when reality followed rules, and reality had stopped following rules the moment Beerus arrived. "Status," he said. The monitoring chief looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. "Entity remains stationary. No movement in 6 hours. Spatial distortions holding steady at previous levels. No new anomalies." Define no new. Nothing we haven't cataloged already. Time dilation near the park. Gravitational inconsistencies. Electromagnetic fluctuations that suggest dimensional bleed. All within established parameters. Established parameters for the impossible. Owlman pulled up the data. 4 days of readings that should have been physically impossible, but were somehow normal now. Reality bending to accommodate something that shouldn't exist, and the accommodation becoming the new baseline. "Ultraman status," Owlman said. "Med Bay. Physically intact. Psychologically." The chief hesitated. Difficult to assess. Ultraman had been in the medical wing for 18 hours. Not injured. Not traumatized in any conventional sense. Just sitting in a reinforced observation room, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He'd gone to the park again. Not impulsively. Strategically. With a plan. With calculations. With the understanding that his first attempt had been too direct, too simple, too much like challenging a force of nature to a fistfight. The second approach had been tactical. Maneuvering, testing angles, looking for the gap between absolute power and absolute attention. Finding the moment when Beerus was looking elsewhere and striking from a direction that hadn't been tested. It had been perfect. Textbook application of strategic violence. Speed force precision, all aligned to deliver maximum impact while minimizing exposure. Beerus had looked at him, just looked. Not attacked, not defended, just acknowledged that Ultraman was there, was doing something, was attempting to solve a problem through violence. And something changed. Ultraman couldn't explain it. The medical team couldn't measure it. Owlman's instruments detected nothing. But Ultraman knew with the certainty of someone who just lost something fundamental that he was different now, not weaker. His strength was intact. His powers functioned. Every test came back nominal. But the weight had changed. The gravity he carried. The presence that made rooms go quiet when he entered them. It was gone. He was still powerful, still dangerous, still capable of leveling buildings and breaking armies. But he was no longer the thing that made those capabilities matter. He was strong the way a tool was strong, functional, useful, but no longer the hand that wielded authority. The realization sat in his chest like cold iron. Beerus hadn't taken his powers, hadn't damaged his body, hadn't even hurt him in any measurable way. But he'd removed something that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with what it meant to be Ultraman. The assumption that he mattered. Superwoman stood near Owlman's console. She'd been quiet for hours, not planning, not scheming, just watching the feeds and realizing that every instinct she'd developed for reading power dynamics had stopped working. "He's breaking us without touching us," she said. "No." Owlman's eyes didn't leave the data. "We're breaking ourselves. He's just removing the scaffolding that held our delusions upright." "That's not helpful. It's accurate." She turned to face him. "Then give me something useful. A plan. A contingency. Anything that isn't watching our infrastructure erode while we document it scientifically." Owlman pulled up every analysis they'd run, every simulation, every model that had tried to predict what Beerus would do under different conditions. All of them contradicted each other. The same input produced different outputs depending on variables that shouldn't matter. Beerus responded to disrespect, but not consistently. To violence, but not predictably. To attention, but not in ways that made tactical sense. "We're not inside a system that responds to intelligence," Owlman said quietly. "We're inside one that responds to judgment. And judgment isn't a variable we can control. Judgment about what? Whether we deserve to keep existing as we are. Whether our behavior crosses thresholds we can't see. Whether we're loud enough to require correction." He closed the displays. "Every entity we've dealt with operates on incentives, resources, territory, survival, fear. This thing operates on aesthetics, on whether we're annoying, and you can't model annoyance." Johnny Quick limped into the operations room. His speed formula was still recovering. His muscles still remembered running 300 miles in 11 seconds and hadn't forgiven him yet. Power Ring's ring went dark. Everyone turned. Dark as in no glow, no constructs, no Volthoom whispering. It's just a ring now, inert metal. Owlman pulled up Power Ring's monitoring data. The energy signature that had been constant for months was gone. Not fluctuating, not diminished. Gone. Like someone had reached into the ring's fundamental nature and turned off the part that made it meaningful. "Where is he?" "Isolation cell, requested it himself. Said he needed to be somewhere that couldn't hear him scream when the silence became too much." The implications cascaded. Volthoom was ancient, had consumed civilizations, had broken heroes and twisted realities. And now it was hiding. Not from Beerus directly, from the possibility of being noticed by something that could decide whether ancient entities got to keep existing. "So we've lost our heavy hitter and our wild card," Superwoman said. "What's left?" "Us," Owlman said. "And whatever plan we can build that doesn't rely on power, power is all we have. Then we're already dead. We just haven't stopped moving yet." The room went quiet. The kind of silence that came when people ran out of comfortable lies and had to sit with uncomfortable truths. In the park, Beerus opened his eyes, not reacting to anything, just opening them. Looking around at the city that had spent 4 days trying to solve him, contain him, understand him, and learning that solutions required frameworks and frameworks required rules, and rules required someone to enforce them. And the only one enforcing rules here was sitting beneath a tree, mildly annoyed that the noise still hadn't stopped completely. He stood, stretched. The gesture was casual, normal, the sort of thing anyone might do after sitting too long. Reality rippled, not violently, just adjusted. Like the universe was accommodating the fact that something had changed position and needed space to exist in a new configuration. Beerus walked to the edge of the park, looked up at the Syndicate tower 6 blocks away, at the people inside running calculations and building plans, and still thinking that thinking would save them. "Still loud," he said. His voice shouldn't have carried that distance. Shouldn't have been audible through reinforced walls and soundproofing and the general chaos of a city that never stopped making noise. But in the operations room, every person heard it clearly, like it was spoken directly into their ear. Alman's hands froze over his console. "Did he just—" "Yes," Superwoman said. "He's talking to us. From 6 blocks away." Physics stopped being relevant to him days ago. Beerus raised one hand, palm open. The gesture he'd used before, not threatening, not aggressive, just indicating. "You pull things, cause," he said. "You take. You control. You think that's power. It's not. It's just noise that hasn't been corrected yet." His hand closed slightly, not into a fist, just fingers moving closer together. A gesture of containment. In the operations room, every screen flickered. Not power failure, not malfunction. Just flickered like reality was trying to remember if those screens had always been there, or if someone had added them recently, and maybe they weren't necessary anymore. "He's looking at our systems," Alman said. "Can he shut them down like he did the core? I don't know. But he's demonstrating that he could. That's the point." Beerus lowered his hand. The screen stabilized. The systems returned to normal function. Not because they defended themselves, because he decided they could continue existing for now. "I've been patient," Beerus said. His voice still carried impossible clarity. "You woke me. You pulled me here. You've been loud. I gave you time to learn quiet. You haven't learned?" Ultraman appeared in the doorway of the operations room, pale, unsteady, but standing. Because standing was all he had left when significance had been revoked. "We're not going to learn," Ultraman said. "This is Earth 3. We don't bow. We don't submit. We fight until we win or die." "Then you'll die quiet or loud," Beerus said. "Your choice. But you will die if you keep testing whether I'll make good on corrections." "Corrections?" Superwoman's hand moved toward her weapon reflexively. "You've erased a building, shut down our core, broken our strongest fighter without touching him. What else is there to correct? Your assumption that any of it matters." The words landed like a physical blow. Not because they were harsh, because they were delivered with such complete indifference that they removed even the dignity of being opposed. They weren't enemies. They were errors. Mistakes in a system that was being debugged. "What do you want?" Alman asked. The question cost him something. Admission that they didn't have leverage, didn't have solutions, just had to ask and hope the answer was something they could survive providing. Beerus looked directly at the tower, at the room full of people who thought they were predators and had just learned they were prey, that had been ignored out of boredom. "Quiet," he said. "I want you to stop making noise I have to notice. We've shut down the lattice. We've left you alone. We've avoided the park. What else is there? Yourselves." Beerus's tone didn't change. "You exist loudly. You take loudly. You hurt loudly. Every action you perform screams that you think you matter, that you have authority, that you're something other than temporary arrangements of matter I haven't bothered to correct yet. So we're supposed to just stop operating, stop existing. I don't care what you do. Just do it quieter." The communication ended. Not cut off, just finished. Beerus turned away from the tower, walked back to his tree, sat down, closed his eyes. The message was delivered. The judgment was pronounced. What they did with it was their problem. In the operations room, people looked at each other with the expression of soldiers who'd just realized they were fighting a war that had already been lost before they'd known it started. "Options?" Ultraman said. His voice was flat, empty of the certainty that had always defined it. "We can evacuate," Owlman said. "Declare the city compromised, relocate operations, start over somewhere he isn't." That's surrender. That's survival. We don't survive by running. We don't survive by staying either. Not if staying means continuing to operate the way we have been. Owlman pulled up evacuation protocols. He's given us parameters. Exist quieter. That's achievable if we're willing to redefine what we do. You want to negotiate with him? I want to stop giving him reasons to notice us. There's a difference. Superwoman looked at the feed showing the park, showing Beerus sitting motionless beneath a tree, while a city bent itself into knots, trying to understand what it had become. "What if we can't be quiet enough?" she asked. "What if our existence is inherently loud to something like him? Then we become very good at being absent when he's paying attention. That's not a plan. That's hoping he gets bored. Hope is all we have. Power failed. Intelligence failed. Tactics failed. We're down to hope and the possibility that something else becomes more interesting than we are." Johnny Quick's speed formula ran through his head. Not as calculation, as mantra. The only thing keeping him from realizing that speed meant nothing when the finish line could be removed from existence. "What about powering?" he asked. "Contained. Monitored. Volthoom's silence is probably the smartest thing any entity has done since this started. So we do nothing. We do less than nothing. We become so irrelevant that noticing us requires effort he's not willing to spend." Ultraman slammed his fist into the wall. The reinforced alloy crumpled. The gesture was hollow. Physical strength without the weight to make it meaningful. "I didn't build this empire to hide from threats." "You didn't build it at all," Owlman said quietly. "None of us did. We took it. And now something's here that doesn't recognize taking as legitimate acquisition. So we adjust or we get erased. Those are the options." The silence that followed was total. The kind of silence that came when every argument had been exhausted. And all that remained was the truth no one wanted to speak. They'd lost, not through battle, not through strategy. They'd lost through irrelevance, through being categorized as noise by something that had the authority to decide what got to make sound. In the park, Beerus sat beneath his tree. The city was quieter now. Not silent, not compliant, but quieter. The screaming certainty of human authority had dimmed to something more uncertain, more careful. Better, not good, but better. He'd give them time. See if they learned the lesson. See if existence under observation taught them the difference between power and permission. And if they didn't learn, he'd teach them. One correction at a time. One removal at a time. Until the noise stopped or he got bored and removed the source. Either way, the outcome was the same. Quiet. The city adjusted its operations around a new constant. Not gravity, not law, but the presence of something that could revoke both at a whim. And the only prayer anyone had was that whims took effort and effort required motivation. And maybe if they were very fortunate, they could stay below the threshold that made effort worthwhile. In the medical wing, Ultraman sat in his cell and felt the absence of something he couldn't name. In the operations room, Owlman built contingencies for scenarios that had no solutions. In isolation, Powering sat in silence so complete it felt like drowning. And in the park, something that looked like it might be sleeping continued to exist with the patient inevitability of entropy. The city learned fear, not the tactical kind. Not the kind you could fight or flee. The existential kind. The fear that came from understanding that your entire framework for understanding power had been built on assumptions that weren't true and never had been. That authority was conditional, that existence was provisional, that everything you'd built could be revoked by something that didn't even have to try. The realization settled into infrastructure, into policy, into the quiet understanding that Earth 3 was no longer the apex of its own reality, just loud furniture that had been given time to learn how to be quiet, before the noise became intolerable, before corrections became erasures, before the universe's maintenance function decided that this particular arrangement of matter had outlived its utility. The fear was cold, clean, absolute, and it taught what violence never could. That some things were beyond fighting, beyond understanding, beyond everything except the hope that they would get bored and leave. And hope Earth 3 was learning was the cruelest power of all. The meeting happened in a room that officially didn't exist, deep in the Syndicate Tower, 3 levels below what the blueprints acknowledged accessible only through routes that changed weekly and required authorization from 3 separate systems that didn't communicate with each other. The kind of room where decisions got made that couldn't be documented because documentation created liability. 4 people sat at a table designed for 7. The empty chairs were more present than the people occupying them. Power Ring hadn't been invited. Johnny Quick had requested medical leave that everyone knew was just distance. The absence spoke louder than attendance ever had. Alman sat at the head of the table. Posture perfect, expression controlled. The only sign of strain was the way his fingers occasionally twitched toward controls that weren't there, reaching for data that couldn't solve this problem. Superwoman sat to his right, calculating. Every movement measured. She'd survived worse situations than this by being willing to sacrifice anything that wasn't herself. The question was whether that strategy still worked when the threat didn't value what you were willing to give. Ultraman sat across from her. Different. The weight he'd carried for years, the presence that made rooms bow, was gone. He was still physically imposing, still dangerous. But he looked like a king who'd lost his crown and hadn't realized yet that the crown was what had made him king. "We can't continue like this," Superwoman said. "The city's infrastructure is collapsing, not from damage, from fear. People aren't working, they're surviving. There's a difference." "Quantify the difference," Owlman said. "Productivity down 47%. Revenue streams disrupted. Emergency services operating at minimal capacity. We're not running a city anymore. We're managing a slow evacuation of anything that can leave. And those who can't leave, they adapt, or they don't. We've never concerned ourselves with casualties before. Before casualties served a purpose. Intimidation, example, control." Owlman pulled up projections that showed curves all trending toward collapse. "These casualties are just noise, random, meaningless. The entity doesn't notice them enough to care." Ultraman's jaw tightened. "Stop calling him the entity. He has a name. We don't know his name. We know a designation, Beerus, but we don't know what that means. What authority it represents, what hierarchy it belongs to. Does it matter? Everything matters. Information is the only weapon we have left since physical force became irrelevant." The word hung in the air. Irrelevant. The thing Ultraman had been avoiding thinking about for 6 days. The thing that sat in his chest like a tumor growing around his sense of self. "I'm not irrelevant," he said quietly. No one disagreed. The silence was worse than argument. Superwoman broke it. "We need a new approach. Every strategy we've tried has been about opposition, containment, control. We need to consider cooperation." "With what?" Owlman asked. "He doesn't want anything we have. Everyone wants something. We just haven't found his price. His price is quiet. We can't afford that. Quiet means stopping. Stopping means dying. We're predators. We don't stop moving." "Then we redefine predation." She leaned forward. "I've been analyzing his responses. He reacts to disrespect, to loud assertion of authority, to violence. But he doesn't react to deference, to acknowledgement. What if we approach him not as equals, but as subjects? Alman's expression didn't change, but his fingers stopped twitching. You want to negotiate surrender. I want to negotiate survival. There's a difference, not one he recognizes. He doesn't care about our hierarchy, about our submission. He cares about whether we're making noise. Submission is still noise if it comes with demands. Then we make it about offering, not asking. Ultraman stood. The chair scraped. I'm not bowing to anyone. Then you're volunteering to be the first one erased when he runs out of patience. Superwoman said, Your pride isn't strategy. It's liability. The words landed like a slap. Not because they were false, because they were true, and someone had finally said them out loud. You think removing me makes us safer? Ultraman's voice was very quiet, very controlled. I think you're the loudest thing in this tower. I think your existence is an assertion. And assertions are what trigger him. So what you sacrifice me, hand me over like tribute. I'm saying we should consider all options, including the ones that keep the rest of us alive. Alman raised one hand. This isn't productive. Internal conflict is exactly what we can't afford. Why not? Superwoman's eyes didn't leave Ultraman. We've built our entire operation on internal conflict, on everyone fighting everyone else for position. Why stop now when the alternative is pretending we're still a unified front? Because disunity is allowed, fighting is loud, betrayal is loud. Everything about this conversation is exactly what we've been told to stop doing. The room went quiet. Not agreement, just exhaustion. The kind that came from realizing every option was wrong in different ways. We need to test boundaries again, Alman said. But not ours, his. Explain. Alman pulled up personnel files. Subjects. Test cases. People who'd been acquired through various channels for various purposes and were currently consuming resources while providing minimal value. We've been assuming the entity reacts to us specifically, to the Syndicate, to power. What if the trigger is broader? What if it's about how we acquire things, how we treat things? You want to test his morality? Superwoman's tone suggested the concept was foreign. I want to test his threshold. See if there's a difference between aggressive acquisition and passive acquisition, between loud dominance and quiet exploitation, by sacrificing test subjects, by providing him with a choice. See if he distinguishes between guilty and innocent, between those who challenged him and those who simply existed near us. Ultraman looked at Owlman like seeing him for the first time. You're going to feed people to him, to see if he cares. I'm going to create a scenario that reveals information. What he does with that scenario tells us whether there are safe behaviors or if existence itself is the problem. And if it's the latter, then we evacuate completely, declare the city lost, and rebuild elsewhere. Superwoman considered this. What's the scenario? Owlman pulled up schematics. A section of the city. Low strategic value, high population density. We create a disturbance. Something that looks like standard Syndicate operation. Extraction, resource seizure. The kind of thing we've done 1,000 times. But we do it in proximity to him. Close enough that he'd notice if he cared. Far enough that it's not direct challenge. You're using civilians as bait. I'm using them as data. If he reacts, we know his boundary includes witness protection. If he doesn't, we know operation type matters less than volume. The logic was flawless. The ethics were non-existent. This was Earth 3 at its purest. Using people as experimental variables because variables didn't have rights. When, Superwoman asked, tonight, while he's stationary, while we have the most monitoring assets available. And if he erases everyone involved, then we know that proximity to our operations triggers response. We adjust. We create buffer zones. We operate through proxies that have no apparent connection to us. Ultraman stood. I'm not participating in this. You don't have to. Your participation would compromise the data. You're too loud, too visible. This needs to be quiet. Professional, the kind of operation that fades into background noise. The dismissal was absolute. Not angry, not hostile. Just the calm assertion that Ultraman's presence would ruin the experiment. That he was a liability now. That the thing that had made him valuable, the overwhelming force of his authority, was exactly what made him useless. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. "He's going to be a problem," Superwoman said. "He already is. But we can't remove him. He's too entrenched, too symbolic. His disappearance would be noticed. By who, the entity? By everyone. By the city. By the infrastructure that's built around the assumption that he exists. Removing him creates vacuum. Vacuum creates chaos. Chaos is loud. So we contain him. We isolate him. Give him tasks that keep him away from the entity. Let him feel useful while keeping him from triggering another correction." Owlman closed the files. The operation was planned. The variables were set. All that remained was execution and observation. 8 hours later, the extraction began. Professional. Efficient. A Syndicate enforcement team moving through a residential sector with practiced precision. No excessive violence, no unnecessary noise. Just the systematic removal of people who'd been flagged as resource debt. Standard procedure. The kind of thing that happened weekly in a city where existence was conditional and debt was hereditary. The team moved. The people resisted minimally. The process was ugly, but organized. And it happened 3 blocks from where Beerus sat beneath his tree. In the monitoring station, Owlman watched feeds from 17 angles. Thermal, visual, dimensional. Every sensor trained on the park, waiting for response. Beerus didn't move, didn't open his eyes, didn't acknowledge that anything was happening. The extraction proceeded. The people were loaded into transports. The team withdrew. Standard operation completed with standard efficiency. No reaction. Analysis, Owlman said. Entity remained stationary throughout. No change in thermal signature. No spatial distortion beyond baseline. No indication of awareness or response. So he doesn't care about standard operations, or he doesn't care about this specific operation. Sample size is insufficient for conclusions. Owlman made notes, adjusted parameters. The test had provided data, but not answers. Absence of response didn't mean approval. It just meant threshold hadn't been crossed. He was preparing the next test when the reports came in. The transport never arrived at the processing center. It had been en route. GPS confirmed movement. Then the signal just stopped. Not jammed, not interrupted. Just stopped as if the transport had ceased existing in a location the GPS could recognize. Recovery teams found the vehicle 3 hours later. Empty. Not forced open, not damaged. Just empty. The doors still locked from the outside. The people inside simply gone with no mechanism for departure and no evidence of where they'd gone. "Check the entity," Owlman said. "Still stationary, no movement recorded." Then where did they go? Nobody answered. Because the answer was becoming obvious, and nobody wanted to be the first to say it. Beerus had noticed, had responded. Just not in a way that made sense to their instruments or their understanding of causality. The people hadn't been removed from the transport. They'd been removed from the category of things that existed in measurable reality. And he'd done it without moving, without looking, without acknowledging that he'd noticed at all. "He's not reacting to proximity," Owlman said quietly. "He's reacting to judgment, to whether we deserve to keep the things we take. We don't know that." Then explain the empty transport. Explain how people disappear from a locked vehicle without a trace. Nobody could. The silence stretched. The test had provided data, just not the data they wanted. Superwoman pulled up population distribution. If he's judging our operations, if he's removing what we acquire, we can't function. Our entire system is built on acquisition. Then we make acquisition quieter, less visible, more diffuse. We use proxies who don't know they're working for us. We create separation between action and authority. That's not power, that's hiding. Hiding is survival when the alternative is being noticed. In his isolation cell, Power Ring sat in darkness. The ring was inert, had been for 3 days. Volthum's presence was completely gone. Not hiding. Gone. Like the ancient entity had decided that existing anywhere near Beerus was too dangerous and had retreated to wherever cosmic intelligences went when they needed to not be perceived. Power Ring had never been alone before. Not really. Volthum had always been there, whispering, commanding, consuming. The silence was worse than the voice had ever been. He'd tried to reactivate the ring. Nothing. Tried to call Volthum. Nothing. Tried to accept that maybe this was freedom. That maybe losing the entity that had terrorized him was a gift. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like abandonment. Like even the thing that had wanted to destroy him had decided he wasn't worth the risk of being near when something worse was watching. In the park, Beerus opened his eyes, not because of the extraction, not because of the test. Just opened them. Looked around at a city that was quieter than it had been, but still loud in ways that grated. Getting worse, he said to no one. The city had learned fear, but not the right lesson. They'd learned to be careful, not to be quiet. Careful and quiet weren't the same thing. Careful meant calculating. Quiet meant stopping. They hadn't stopped. He could feel it. The way they moved, the way they thought. The way every action was still assertion, even when wrapped in deference. They were still predators, trying to hunt in ways they thought he wouldn't notice. Beerus stood, stretched, looked up at the sky that was darker than it should be because the lattice they'd built had left scars in dimensional space that hadn't healed. "You're still pulling," he said. His voice carried. Not physically. Just existed in a way that made itself heard by anyone who was listening, and everyone who should be. In the operations room, every person froze. "The lattice is offline," a technician said. "Has been for days. Check the core, check everything." They checked. Found readings that shouldn't exist. Residual energy patterns in the Quartian technology. Not active, not pulling, just resonating, responding to something. Creating echoes of the dimensional siphon even while powered down. The machine wasn't active. But it remembered being active. And that memory was enough to create ripples, to make noise in frequencies that Beerus could perceive. "Shut it down," Alman said. "It is shut down." "Then dismantle it, physically, remove every component, scatter it across disposal sites, make it impossible to reassemble. That's our only leverage for dimensional." "Do it, now!" The order went out. Teams mobilized. The Quartian core that had cost 6 governments and 3 years to build began coming apart. Not destroyed. Deconstructed. Every piece cataloged and separated and removed from proximity to every other piece. It took 6 hours. When it was done, the dimensional readings dropped to baseline. The echoes stopped. The memory of pulling faded from reality's substrate. Beerus sat back down, closed his eyes. "Better," he said. In the operations room, Owlman looked at the empty space where the core had been. At the dismantled components spread across 100 locations. At the leverage they'd just surrendered because the alternative was triggering something they couldn't survive. "We've lost our primary asset," Superwoman said. "We lost it days ago. We just stopped pretending it was still ours." "What's left?" Mulman looked at the monitoring feeds. At the city that was quieter now, but still operating. Still trying to maintain systems that required assertion, required dominance, required the very behaviors that kept making them visible to something that valued invisibility. Survival, he said. That's what's left. And hope that survival is quiet enough. Ultraman stood on a rooftop 3 miles from the park, looking at the city he'd controlled, at the empire he'd built, at the authority that had been his identity for so long he'd forgotten it was separate from himself. It was all still there. The buildings, the people, the infrastructure. But it didn't belong to him anymore. Didn't recognize him as its apex. Had found something higher on the food chain and adjusted accordingly. He could leave. Rebuild elsewhere. Start over with the understanding that power had limits he'd never known existed. Or he could stay. Keep existing in a space that had revoked his significance. Keep being strong in ways that didn't matter anymore. The choice should have been simple. Pride would say stay. Tactic would say leave. But both options felt like losing. And Ultraman had never learned how to lose. In the park, something that looked like a purple cat sat beneath a tree and waited. The city was learning. Slowly, painfully. Like teaching a child that stoves were hot by letting them touch the heat. The lesson would take time. But time was one thing Beerus had. Patience was easy when you were the only thing in the room that didn't age, didn't tire, didn't need anything except for the noise to stop. And the noise was getting quieter. Not silent, not compliant, but quieter.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss out future videos. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.